The Appalachian Mountains are a vast and ancient mountain range that stretches for about 1,500 miles, 2,400 kilometers, along the eastern side of North America, from the Canadian province of Newfoundland and Labrador all the way down to central Alabama in the United States. Formed roughly 480 million years ago, they are among the oldest mountains in the world and were once as high as the Alps or the Rockies before millions of years of erosion wore them down to their present, more rounded shape. The Appalachians are known for their rich biodiversity, dense forests, and rolling ridges, and they have played a significant role in the history and culture of the regions they traverse, serving as a natural barrier to early westward expansion and giving rise to unique communities and traditions that still endure today. But behind all that breathtaking beauty lies a side of these mountains that many prefer not to think about. For hidden within these endless woods are chilling stories of unsolved disappearances, mysterious murders, and strange happenings that turn these ancient hills into a place where danger can lurk behind the quiet rustle of the leaves. Today, we're going to talk about 4 true stories that happened deep within these mountains: the baffling disappearance of young Dennis Martin, the heartbreaking murder of Meredith Emerson, the tragic Mountford and Ramsey murders, and the murder on the Appalachian Trail. These stories are real, and they remind us that sometimes, the most beautiful places can hold the darkest secrets. Dennis Martin's disappearance is one of the most enduring missing person cases in the history of the United States, and it continues to disturb both investigators and ordinary people decades later. On June 14, 1969, Dennis Martin, a 6-year-old boy from Knoxville, Tennessee, vanished while on a family camping trip in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Dennis had gone to the park with his father, grandfather, and older brother for what was meant to be a happy Father's Day weekend, something the Martin family did regularly because they were experienced hikers and familiar with the area's terrain. They set up camp at Spence Field, which is an open, grassy area high up in the Smokies near the Appalachian Trail. It's a popular spot for hikers to rest and enjoy the view. There, the Martin family met another family with children around the same age as Dennis and his brother. The kids began playing together while the adults talked nearby. At one point, the children came up with an innocent prank. They decided to split up and sneak up on the adults from different directions to startle them. Dennis, wearing a bright red shirt, hid behind some bushes to wait for the right moment. The other children ran out laughing to surprise the grown-ups, but Dennis never came out from his hiding place. When his father, Bill Martin, realized Dennis hadn't emerged with the others, he immediately called for him. There was no answer. He quickly searched the area where Dennis had last been seen. Within minutes, the entire family joined in, calling his name and checking the nearby woods. Bill Martin ran down the Appalachian Trail for almost 2 miles, yelling for his son, hoping that Dennis had wandered off and would respond. When he returned to camp without finding any trace of Dennis, the family alerted the park rangers, who launched an official search within hours. Over the next few days, the search grew into the largest in the park's history. More than 1,400 people participated, including park rangers, local volunteers, experienced trackers, and even Special Forces troops from the U.S. Army's Green Berets. Despite the massive effort, they found almost nothing. The weather worked against them. Heavy rain fell on the first night Dennis was missing, washing away possible footprints and scent trails. Searchers covered miles of rough terrain, dense forest, deep ravines, caves, and streams. Some claimed to find small footprints that might have belonged to Dennis, but these were never confirmed and could not be followed far enough to provide answers. One family, the Key family, reported a strange detail that still raises questions. They were hiking about 5 miles away on the same day Dennis vanished and said they heard an enormous, sickening scream. Shortly afterward, they saw what they described as a rough-looking man moving through the woods, trying not to be seen, and apparently carrying something over his shoulder. Some people think this sighting could mean Dennis was abducted, but no evidence ever confirmed this theory, and the lead went nowhere. Many explanations have been offered over the years. Some experts believe Dennis probably got lost and died of exposure, and wild animals scattered any remains before they could be found. Others are convinced he was abducted, but no suspect was ever identified, and no clues ever surfaced. Some local legends even claim there are feral people or old hermits living deep in the Smokies who could have taken him, but these stories are more folklore than fact. The disappearance deeply affected the Martin family, the park rangers, and the wider public. For years, Dennis's parents returned to the park to search on their own and follow up on any rumor or possible sighting, but nothing credible was ever found. To this day, the National Park Service keeps Dennis Martin's file open, but no new leads have come forward that would solve what happened in those few silent minutes when a 6-year-old boy stepped behind a bush and never came back out. This tragic case is often brought up when people talk about missing person cases in national parks, because it shows how quickly and completely someone can vanish, even when surrounded by family and experienced searchers. The story of Dennis Martin remains one of the most well-known and haunting missing child cases in the Smoky Mountains, and one that still raises painful questions for anyone who reads about it. Meredith Hope Emerson was born on June 20, 1983, in Charleston, South Carolina, and from the very beginning, her family and friends would say she carried a light within her that brightened every space she entered. She grew up mostly in North Carolina and Colorado, moving with her family, absorbing the spirit of adventure that the vast American landscapes inspired. From an early age, Meredith displayed a sense of curiosity about the world and a love for nature. She loved animals, the hush of mountain trails, and the rustling secrets hidden in forests. By the time she was in her 20s, she had become an accomplished young woman, a graduate of the University of Georgia with honors, a dedicated student of French, and a practitioner of martial arts, holding a blue belt in Aikido. Her friends often described her as determined, kind-hearted, and fiercely independent. She was the kind of friend who would lend you her last dollar, drive miles out of her way to help, and yet expect nothing in return except honesty and kindness. It was the dawn of a new year, January 1, 2008, when Meredith decided to celebrate the fresh promise of 2008 by hiking Blood Mountain, one of the most popular hiking spots in northern Georgia, part of the sprawling Appalachian Trail. Blood Mountain, with its haunting name and panoramic views, was a place where Meredith often went to find solitude and inspiration. She brought along her faithful black Labrador mix, Ella, who was never far from her side. The two were inseparable. The sight of Meredith's lean figure moving along the trails with Ella's wagging tail trailing behind was a familiar one for local hikers. That morning, Meredith parked her car at the trailhead near Vogel State Park. She was dressed for the cold mountain air. It was winter in Georgia, crisp and sharp, with a promise of snow in the higher elevations. The Appalachian Trail, in its raw beauty, can be both inviting and treacherous in winter. But Meredith was an experienced hiker. She was prepared. She texted friends and family, told them she was going out to hike, and promised she would be back soon. There was no hint of dread, no premonition that her path would cross with someone who had darkness coiled in his mind like a serpent waiting to strike. As Meredith climbed higher into the forest, moving with the steady rhythm of a seasoned hiker, she did not know that another figure was watching her. Gary Michael Hilton was his name, a drifter in his 60s, wiry, unkempt, with a mind twisted by years of isolation and criminal thoughts. Hilton had been wandering the national forests of the southeast for years, living in his van, camping in the shadows, and surviving on petty theft and occasional odd jobs. But beneath the ragged surface lay something far more sinister, a predator's patience. Hilton had begun targeting lone hikers on remote trails. He was calculating, cold, and opportunistic, always searching for moments when people were at their most vulnerable, alone, deep in the woods, out of reach. On that New Year's Day, Hilton spotted Meredith and her dog on the trail. She was alone, young, healthy, the perfect target in Hilton's twisted calculus. Some hikers later reported seeing them talking on the trail, the older man with thinning gray hair, scruffy beard, and the young woman with her black dog, who seemed friendly but cautious. No one knows exactly how Hilton first approached her. Perhaps he asked her for directions or struck up casual conversation about the trail conditions. He knew how to sound harmless. But at some point during that hike, Hilton made his move. He brandished a knife, or perhaps threatened her with physical force. The exact details of the confrontation will never be fully known. What is clear is that Meredith fought back with all her strength and courage. Her martial arts training helped her resist. She managed to wrestle away a knife at one point, and evidence later showed she fought so fiercely that Hilton ended up with defensive wounds on his hands and face. Meredith's dog, Ella, barked, bit, and lunged to protect her beloved human, but Hilton, larger and armed, overpowered them. After subduing Meredith, Hilton forced her off the trail and back toward his van, which he had parked in a secluded area. There, for 4 harrowing days, he kept her captive. He tied her up, restrained her, and forced her to give up her ATM card PIN. During those days, Meredith tried to stall him by giving him wrong numbers and misleading information, hoping help might come or that someone would notice the suspicious withdrawals. In the face of unimaginable fear, Meredith displayed a calm and clever resolve. She spoke to him, tried to reason with him. A young woman trying to appeal to whatever shred of humanity might remain in the mind of a man who had already decided her fate. It was later discovered that she had asked him repeatedly to let her go, but Hilton's mind was set. In those 4 days, Hilton took Meredith to various ATMs in Georgia and North Carolina, forcing her to withdraw money while carefully trying to avoid drawing attention. Surveillance footage would later show Meredith, her face bruised but calm, walking beside Hilton. In some images, she seemed to be trying to remain composed, perhaps silently hoping someone would notice and intervene. At the same time, Hilton shaved her head in an attempt to disguise her and prevent descriptions from matching her missing person report. Even in captivity, Meredith remained vigilant, giving the wrong pins, buying herself precious time. Meanwhile, Meredith's friends and family realized something was terribly wrong when she did not return home. Her car was found still parked at the trailhead, a silent sentinel waiting for its owner to come back. Her dog Ella, loyal beyond measure, would later be found wandering alone, confused, hungry, but alive. Search parties were organized. Flyers went up. Local police, volunteers, and the Georgia Bureau of Investigation launched an extensive search. The news spread rapidly. A young woman missing in the vast wilderness struck fear and empathy in equal measure. As the investigation intensified, law enforcement began connecting dots between Meredith's disappearance and other unsolved cases in the region. They found out about a suspicious older man in a white van who had been seen talking to hikers. They traced ATM withdrawals and surveillance footage. The hunt for Hilton turned into a race against time, fueled by hope that Meredith might still be alive. But on January 4, 2008, Hilton knew his time was running out. He realized Meredith was becoming too much of a liability, the search was closing in, and her resistance had delayed him longer than he planned. In his final act of cruelty, he led her deep into the woods, telling her they were going to walk away to freedom. But Hilton never intended to let her go. Instead, he struck her from behind with a car jack handle, killing her in a remote forest clearing. He then decapitated her body, hoping to make identification more difficult and to hide evidence that could link him to the murder. It was days later, on January 7, that authorities finally caught up with Hilton at a DeKalb County gas station. His van, cluttered with trash and supplies, was a traveling den of horror. Inside, police found blood, Meredith's belongings, and evidence that connected him to the crime. Faced with the mounting evidence, Hilton confessed. He led authorities to where he had discarded Meredith's remains in the Dawson Forest Wildlife Management Area. His cold, matter-of-fact statements to investigators shocked even seasoned detectives. He showed no remorse. He bargained for his own life by agreeing to reveal where he had left her head in exchange for taking the death penalty off the table. The aftermath of Meredith's murder reverberated far beyond the Appalachian woods. Her family, friends, and the entire community were left shattered by the loss of a bright, promising young woman who had done nothing but go for a hike with her dog. Her parents, Elaine and Dave Emerson, spoke publicly about her spirit, her bravery, and her compassion. They set up foundations and scholarships in her name, determined that her memory would not be defined by her final moments but by the life she lived, a life full of hope, courage, and dreams. Gary Michael Hilton was later linked to the murders of other hikers in the Southeast, including John and Irene Bryant in North Carolina and Cheryl Dunlap in Florida. He was convicted and given multiple life sentences, spending the rest of his days in prison, a small measure of justice for lives that could never be restored. But the story of Meredith Emerson does not end with the brutal act of a madman. Her legacy lives on in the way people remember her, as a woman who fought back fiercely, who faced unthinkable fear with unimaginable courage, who outwitted her captor for days in the hope that someone might come for her. Her beloved dog Ella, who survived, became a symbol of loyalty and love, later adopted by one of the investigators who helped solve the case. In her hometown, candlelight vigils were held, and trails were hiked in her honor. The community came together not only to mourn but to promise that her story would not fade into another sad headline. It would serve as a reminder to cherish loved ones, to stay vigilant in wild places, and to remember that even in the darkest moments, the strength of the human spirit can shine through. In the years since Meredith's murder, her family has advocated for better safety awareness for hikers and outdoor adventurers. They have shared her story in hopes that others will take precautions when venturing alone into the wild, to tell friends where they are going, to hike in groups when possible, to remain aware of their surroundings, and to trust their instincts if something feels off. Her story has been featured in countless news reports, true crime documentaries, and books, each retelling serving as both a cautionary tale and a testament to her bravery. Robert Mountford Jr. was born in Massachusetts in 1953. He grew up in a Catholic household in Bangor, Maine, part of a family where community service was woven into daily life. Robert, Bob, to most friends, had always been known for his quiet manner, his careful attention to others, and a stubborn commitment to doing the right thing. After high school, he drifted through a few early jobs, did some time in college courses, and eventually settled on social work as a career. By the time he enrolled at the University of Maine, he was older than some of his classmates, more serious, a little reserved. He found his calling working with young people and the elderly through Catholic charities. Laura Susan Ramsey, everyone called her Susan, was born in Millinocket, Maine, in 1954. She was the second of 4 children, the daughter of a millworker father and a mother who stayed home when the kids were young. Susan was bright in school, active in her parish, and known to take charge of projects. After high school, she enrolled at the University of Maine at Orono, focusing first on education but then shifting to social work. She felt called to practical, boots-on-the-ground help for vulnerable families, especially those in rural areas like the ones she'd grown up in. Robert and Susan met through their university School of Social Work. Both were drawn to the same outreach program, organized through the Catholic Diocese and the Maine Appalachian Trail Club. The idea was straightforward: recruit students who could volunteer for summer or spring stints along the Appalachian Trail, partly to do community surveys, partly to assist with trail maintenance reports. The trail ran like a green spine down the eastern United States, a magnet for hikers, a corridor through remote communities. The Catholic outreach used this as a way to connect with rural families, trail maintainers, and transient hikers who might need help or services. In early 1981, they signed up together for a spring trail survey. They would be traveling as a pair, safety in numbers, shared supplies, and combined notes. Their route would take them from southwestern Virginia up through parts of West Virginia, reporting on trail conditions and stopping at designated points to check in with local parish contacts and trail club volunteers. It wasn't supposed to be a dangerous job. They had hiking gear, simple tents, a small camp stove, and journals to record their findings. They left Maine in early May. They rode buses and hitched short rides until they reached Pearisburg, Virginia, a town near the Appalachian Trail in Giles County. Pearisburg was, and still is, a small mountain town, quiet but a common pit stop for through hikers to resupply. Robert and Susan stocked up on basic provisions. Powdered milk, crackers, instant coffee, cans of beans. They signed the trail registers, the logbooks at shelters where hikers note their names, dates, and sometimes brief messages for others coming behind them. Their plan was to hike south along the trail, check shelters, note where repairs were needed, and keep an eye out for littering or other problems. They would send their final reports back to Maine when they returned by bus in June. By May 17, 1981, they had made it to the remote Wapiti shelter. It lay in the Jefferson National Forest, tucked under tall hardwoods, reachable only by foot. There was no road access, just the trail winding in from the north and out to the south. The shelter itself was typical of the era: 3 walls of rough-hewn logs, a slanted roof, an open front with a small fire pit a few yards away. At some point that afternoon or evening, Robert and Susan encountered Randall Lee Smith. Smith was born and raised in Pearisburg. He was the kind of neighbor who drifted around town but kept mostly to himself. He hunted squirrels and small game in the mountains, camped along the creeks, and sometimes told people he was living off the land. To the Appalachian Trail community, he was an unknown, just another man with a pack. He wasn't an official hiker or trail maintainer. He simply drifted between campsites, often on or near the trail, with a .22 rifle slung under his coat. No one knows exactly how the conversation unfolded. Later evidence suggested that Smith joined Robert and Susan at the Wapiti shelter around dusk. They cooked a simple meal, instant soup, crackers, maybe some coffee, and may have talked about the trail. The trail register later found at the shelter showed their signatures and the date, May 17. It is believed that sometime after they ate, Smith produced his rifle. There was no robbery demand, no threats for valuables. Robert Mountford, slight of build and no threat to Smith, was shot first, a single bullet to the torso. Susan Ramsey was shot next. Whether she tried to run or beg for her life will never be fully known. Smith fired again, striking Robert a second time. He fell close to the shelter's open front. Susan's body was found a short distance away, covered with leaves and pine boughs. Afterward, Smith took some of their food and gear, a canteen, maybe dry rations. He did not take identification or wallets. He tried to hide the bodies under brush, but did so clumsily. Then he vanished into the woods. For 2 days, the shelter sat quiet except for the usual rustle of spring wind through the trees. Other hikers, including local day hikers and a few northbound through hikers, passed through the area. Some noticed an unusual smell, but the murders weren't immediately obvious. Back in Maine, when Robert and Susan failed to check in, their families assumed a simple delay. But when several days passed with no word, local trail volunteers began backtracking. By May 23, a search party was assembled. Volunteers hiked south from Pearisburg to the Wapiti shelter, following the trail's white blazes through tangled undergrowth and muddy switchbacks. They found signs of an abandoned camp, backpacks and some scattered belongings. Then they found drag marks and disturbed brush a few yards from the shelter. Under a thin layer of sticks, they discovered the bodies of Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey. The Giles County Sheriff's Department cordoned off the scene. The .22 caliber entry wounds, the lack of any defensive wounds indicating a struggle, and the fact that both victims were found clothed pointed to a single sudden act of violence. Locals told deputies that Randall Lee Smith had been seen in the area. One hiker remembered a man with a small rifle lingering at the shelter the same week. Another Pearisburg resident reported that Smith had recently come into town asking about canned food. He was known to camp nearby and knew the Wapiti shelter well. Police obtained a warrant and searched Smith's mother's house where he sometimes stayed. They found some of the stolen camping supplies, tins of food marked with Robert and Susan's initials, a camping pot, a map. The .22 rifle was recovered hidden in a storage shed behind the house. On May 30, 1981, Randall Lee Smith was arrested near Pearisburg without incident. He did not resist, did not confess outright, but did not deny being at the shelter. In an interview room, he said little. They were nice, he reportedly said when asked about Robert and Susan. He never offered a reason why he pulled the trigger. The trial drew attention from the regional press but never became a national headline. Prosecutors weighed a death penalty case but settled for a plea deal to ensure a conviction. In September 1981, Smith pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 30 years, 15 years for each murder, served concurrently. In prison, Randall Lee Smith was described by guards as quiet, polite, solitary. He did not seek counseling, did not correspond with victim support groups, did not write any confessions. In 1996, after serving about 15 years, he was released on parole for good behavior. The families of Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey were never fully satisfied with the outcome. They gave few statements to the press. What little they did say focused on how both had died doing work they believed in, though no one could say exactly why they were targeted. For the Appalachian Trail community, the murders changed the sense of safety overnight. Trail guides began advising hikers not to camp alone in shelters if they felt uneasy about others nearby. Trail clubs urged backpackers to sign registers faithfully so that searchers could trace their last stops. The Wapiti shelter was eventually torn down and rebuilt in a slightly different location, but many hikers still avoid camping there alone. Randall Lee Smith drifted into obscurity until 2008. In May of that year, 27 years to the month after killing Mountford and Ramsey, Smith returned to the same stretch of forest near Dismal Creek. He befriended 2 fishermen, Scott Johnston and Sean Farmer, who had set up camp. After sharing a meal with them, echoing the same pattern, he produced a .22 caliber handgun, shot both men, and fled in one of their trucks. Both men survived and staggered to the road for help. Smith crashed the stolen truck during the manhunt and died from injuries in the wreck. The parallel was not lost on anyone: the same man, the same mountain hollows, the same random pattern of sudden violence. No note was found, no final explanation left behind. Today, hikers on the Appalachian Trail pass the area near the old Wapiti shelter without obvious marker or memorial. The trail winds on, quiet as ever. The names Robert Mountford Jr. and Laura Susan Ramsey appear mostly in trail safety pamphlets, local crime histories, and the memories of those who keep the trail registers dry under the lean-to roofs. Their murder remains one of the most haunting crimes in the trail's long, green corridor: 2 young social workers who walked into the woods to help, only to cross paths with a stranger who never explained why he pulled the trigger. I'm still trying to process this. And you'll have to forgive me if there are any typos in this because I'm currently shaking like a leaf. I saw this sight and felt like I would be able to vocalize to some capacity what happened over the past 2 days. But maybe I need to be calling the police? I don't know. I mean, I really don't. Okay. I'm an avid backpacker. I don't live too far away from the Appalachian Trail where it moves through the Blue Ridge Mountains. I'm always going up by myself. I've been doing that for years now and never have I had a reason to think that I should bring someone else. But after this trip I'm not sure if I will ever backpack again. I was able to get to my favorite spot just before sunset Monday night. Built a fire, set up my tent and laid out my food. I was walking down to a spring to filter some water when I swore I heard a high-pitched scream. Typically it's not uncommon to hear coyotes, bobcats or other animals that make sounds similar to a human scream. So I just kinda thought that's what I was hearing. But it was still a little unnerving, something was different about it. Filtering my water and then walking back I saw a man coming from the east along the Att. We were eventually going to cross paths as I had to cross over the trail to head up to my camp. Slowing down his pace it was obvious he had noticed me. For the most part encountering other backpackers isn't a big deal. Everyone you meet is friendly and if you find another solo packer they welcome a little conversation. So when we did in fact meet up I offered a smile and said, "Good evening." He said his name was Bradley and I told him mine. He looked like he had been on the trail for a long while. Black military-style cargo pants, gray t-shirt, black combat boots and a badass backpack that looked as if it was loaded with everything a person would need to survive in the wild. His hair a reddish-brown shaggy and unkempt which turned into a nearly full beard on his face. Super friendly though greeting me with a large grin. Bradley seemed like one of those guys that you instantly become buddies with. We chatted a bit about how long we had been on the trail and whatnot. As I suspected he had hiked for nearly a month. Said he was taking a month off from life, before heading back into reality again. He seemed so genuine. I have to admit I was taken by his charisma too and I felt like we had been old pals for ages. Asking if he could camp with me I felt no reason not to let him. Watching him unpack his tent and equipment I realized how efficient he was. It almost seemed military in a way. Everything organized and neat as he laid out his belongings in a way that appeared mechanical, as if he had performed those motions hundreds of times. After he completed his setup, which really only took moments, he made himself some coffee over my fire and we chatted about typical things. As the night progressed I noticed him becoming less talkative. Staring into the fire or gazing up at the sky all the while sipping his coffee. Eventually I decided to turn in and he said he would do the same. It was about 3 a.m. and I heard his tent unzip. It was a little cold and I remember specifically the sound of the laces on his boots being tightened. But after that I didn't hear him walking around. I assumed he had to relieve himself after all that coffee. But all I could hear was the night breeze sweeping over the highlands. Thinking about it now I'm literally feeling sick at my stomach. Fuck me. Okay. So I'm laying there nearly on the verge of sleep again when I hear far in the distance what I know for certain now, was the sound of a man screaming. In absolute horror. The scream echoed throughout the forest in one solid cry and then it was silenced. In the moment though, in my near-sleep state and with the sound of wind, I wasn't sure what it was. An animal or something. But I sat straight up in my sleeping bag and reached for my flashlight. Just silence though. Just the wind, the sound of trees and the feeling of every hair on my neck standing on end. Took some time, but I eventually went back to sleep. At the time I reasoned it had to be something else. That morning Bradley was already up and had his coffee brewing over a newly made fire. After waking myself up a bit and starting my own breakfast I asked him if he had heard anything last night. He asked what I had heard and I described it to him as I did just now. He said something like, "Oh yeah, I did hear that." It was loud, wasn't it? We talked about what sort of an animal could make a noise like that, and neither of us could come up with anything. He even said, to be honest, it sounded like a man screaming for his life. He asked if he could continue on with me, and at that moment I was glad to have someone with me for a while. Honest to God, he was such a nice guy, and I swear I never felt unsafe around him. Sometime during the day we passed a group of hikers. 3 women and 2 men, all carrying packs. They were heading in our direction but at a slower pace, and asked us if we knew where a water source was. We both started at the same time to tell them, so I let Bradley finish. I've hiked this trail for as long as I could walk, and listening to his description of the trail ahead one would think that he had too. But I noticed early on Bradley had an impeccable memory and sense of direction. For the rest of the hike he asked a lot of questions about myself. By the time we reached a place to camp for the night, I felt like I had told him my entire life story. He seemed so honestly interested though. I felt like at the time that I was making a new best friend or something. That night was when I noticed for the first time the Bowie knife he had tucked on the side of his backpack. He pulled it out and expertly sliced an apple, nearly keeping everything but the seeds. I was kinda wondering where the apple came from, considering that last night he had told me that he was getting low on rations and that he intended to jump off the trail and hit a store before getting back on. But I didn't ask, as he tossed me part of it. He talked a little about his family. Specifically his younger brother, who he said I reminded him of. He mentioned more than once that I would have got along with him. He's not backpacked in years though. John was his name, he had said. After John had went away, Bradley didn't have a partner to hike with, and so he had been going at it solo for the past 4 years. I started to feel bad for the guy as I realized there was a part of him that was lonely, I think. I dunno. At this point I have no idea what to think. Shit. Okay. I have to focus. So that night I couldn't sleep. I was just wide awake. Thinking about how my trip was nearly over and that I hated the feeling of coming back to work and dealing with the real world. I had to pee, so I put on my shirt, boots, and tried to unzip my tent so as not to wake up Bradley. This was last night, and it was cold too. Standing in the woods I could hear just barely over the wind the sound of talking. Must be the group that we passed before. Most hikers like that don't ever think that there might be others around them. Or animals looking in, and so they talk and laugh as if they are the only ones in the world. I started to make my way toward the sound out of curiosity, I guess. I dunno what I was thinking. I could see their firelight jumping around between the pines, and one of the women burst out laughing. Before I got any closer their voices dropped in volume. I was about 25 feet away with trees between us. The sound of that first scream still saturates my mind. Shit. I don't know what to do. I'm going to have to stop typing for a moment. Okay, so it was nothing like anything I had ever felt or experienced before. Those people were dying. I know that now. I saw it on the news when I got home. I couldn't see anything, so I don't know what happened. I mean, I know what happened. I know it because of what the reports have said. But fuck, I don't really know. I don't. It was as if I were trapped inside of a tornado of screams and darkness. Somehow I was on the ground. Not sure if I fell down or what. Pine needles on my hands. I was trying to get back to my tent. That's all I wanted. I've never felt such fear. Yes. That's what it was. It was fear. It was complete terror. I could hear one of the men call out a name, a woman's name, but right now I can't think of what it was. I just know he sounded absolutely horrified. Then I heard him screaming. Begging and screaming. Crying and screaming. I ran. I was able to run finally. By the time I made it back to my camp and into my tent, the air was silent. Something had killed those people. But I knew it wasn't a something. It was a someone. I knew it and I know it. It felt like I was drunk. I couldn't think clearly. I was disoriented. I kept hearing things that maybe weren't anything at all. I sat in my tent frozen. That's what terror feels like. That's what it is. I'm not sure how much time passed, but my heart stopped when I heard Bradley's tent unzip. I heard the sound of him taking off his boots, and then after his tent was zipped again, I could tell he was sliding into his sleeping bag. I didn't sleep. I sat there till the sun came up. That was this morning. We made a fire. Had our breakfast. He chatted a little about spring mornings and other things. I don't know how I held it together. I don't. He asked if I wouldn't mind dropping him off at a store near the trail exit I was about to hit where my car waited. Which I did. This morning about 11 a.m. we pulled up to Breaker's Market just off the at. He thanked me and asked if he could have my number in case he ever needed a partner for a hike. I gave it to him. After our conversations the days before, he already knows where I live and work. He shook my hand and patted me on the shoulder. I jumped in my car and got home this afternoon. I think I slept for about an hour maybe. The local news just reported people missing on the trail where I was. Also, I just heard that 5 people have been confirmed dead, in what appears to be an animal attack. What do I do? I know why those people are missing. They're all dead. Most likely gutted and butchered. Screaming to be allowed to live. God knows how many more are laying out there in parts right now. Their killer is still out there too. And I gave him my phone number.